Good morning, everyone. I'm Abhary. I'm the CEO of Spectrum Media. We are the largest radio broadcaster in Turkey, operating both on a terrestrial and a digital basis. And I've been asked to talk to you a little bit about digital radio in Turkey. I should start off with a confession to say that I'm not really a radio guy. And for that matter, I'm not really a digital guy. My background is as a management consultant and previously as an entrepreneur in the live entertainment industry. And as it's obvious, I'm also not Turkish. So it's with those credentials as a non-digital, non-radio, non-Turkish guy that I'm here to talk to you about digital radio in Turkey. But let's give it a shot anyway. And I think a great place for us to start is to look at how radio has evolved over the past 100 years or so. In the 30s and 40s, there was the first golden age of radio. And this was an age that was marked by entertainment shows, news programming, and radio theater. But then FM came along, AM came along. And when AM came along, and television disrupted this. And when television disrupted this in the 60s and 70s, radio redefined itself, and it started defining itself as being AM-focused and music-focused. Then FM came along, and in the 80s and 90s, it again re-established itself as being focused on talk radio in the AM and music on the FM. And now we're in the fourth golden age of radio as disrupted by internet and marked by internet streaming and mobile applications. This fourth golden age of radio is really marked by four key characteristics. The first is variety. When you don't have a limited spectrum, as on the FM broadcast band to broadcast on, and you have an unlimited spectrum, you can start to address the long tail of consumer needs. So you can have not just broad-based mass radio stations, but you can have niche-targeted stations, things like Latin jazz or bluegrass music or country music. It's also marked by ubiquity, a ubiquity of access. So radio is no longer defined by that little device that you have in your car that accepts FM signals, but it can be any device that's internet connected, whether it's a mobile phone or a laptop or a smart TV. It's also marked by shorter advertising breaks. So on digital radio, you tend to see ad breaks that are shorter, ads that are shorter, which is a greater experience both for the consumer and also helps bring out the advertising more for the advertiser. And lastly, it's marked by personalization of some sort. Either you have the ability to skip songs or banning an artist or the ability to do time shifting. So those are the four key characteristics that are marking this new golden age of radio that we have. But what's happening with the listeners? What are the listeners in the audience doing? So we started looking at the United States. As always, we tend to look at the US to see how they're leading in this market. And over the past several years, we see a massive growth in the number of people that are listening to radio from internet and internet-connected devices. It's forecasted to be as many as 186 million people in a couple of years. That's 64% of the population, 12 plus. So this is not a niche market. This is absolutely a broad-based medium. And it's developing very quickly, but of course, this is the United States. Let's look at other countries in the world and see what they're doing. So we looked at the UK. And in the UK, we see a similar trend. About 30% of all listening to radio today is taking place from a digital means, and that's forecasted to grow. Okay, US and the UK, they're both Anglo-Saxon, very similar markets. Let's look at another market, Germany. In Germany, there's over 3,000 online radio stations operating in the country. I just came from a radio conference in Berlin, and it was very palpable to see how the German market has taken on the internet radio, the radio market as well. Okay, so we have the US, we have the UK, we have Germany. Obviously, this is a trend that's present in the Western world. What about other parts of the world? So let's look at Pakistan. 30% of men that listen to radio in Pakistan listen from a mobile phone. Now, maybe an FM chip on a mobile phone or maybe from mobile streaming. It's also 20% of women. That's an amazing number, and it's a great statistic to indicate how prevalent this trend is. And obviously, the trend continues in Turkey as well. 47% of all listening to radio in Turkey is now happening on an internet or an internet-connected device. So obviously, this is a global trend, and we're also a part of it here in Turkey. One of the reasons that people are taking on the online formats of listening to radio is basically because it helps meet their needs better. So this is a survey from the US, and they asked them, they asked consumers, why would you be interested in listening to radio from an online source rather than from a traditional FM source? And these are some of the answers. They said, you want to be able to listen to audio that you can't get elsewhere. You want to be able to control the music that you have to some extent. You want to have more music variety, fewer commercials, get better reception than you get from the FM band. And so these are some of the drivers that are driving consumers as they think about moving towards listening to radio on online. So the question is, what's happening with the advertisers, and how are advertisers approaching this new medium? The global market, the global addressable market for online radio is actually $55 billion. This is the market that includes display advertising, mobile, rich media, video, as well as broadcast radio advertising. When we drill down a little bit further and look at the US, in the US the addressable market is really a cross-section of three different markets: the about $10 billion online advertising market, a $13.5 billion radio advertising market, and a small but growing mobile ad market. So it's about $25 billion in the US, which is the addressable market for this medium, and it's growing very fast, around 12% growth rate projected to the end of next year. When you look at online radio specifically, that is about a $500 million market in the United States, and that's broken down into a little bit more than half of it is owned by the online-only players. These are folks like Pandora, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. The AM and FM broadcasters make up another big chunk of that, and the rest of the digital audio is run by publishers that have some sort of audio service on their website. One of my favorite statistics about this industry is on the right side of the chart. Pandora, which is the largest internet radio service in the world, is actually the second largest mobile publisher in the world as well. After Google, it has a very, very big chunk of mobile ad revenues. And one of the reasons is, you know, I look at my mobile ads on the phone, and they're not the greatest experience because they're small, and they're a little bit hard to see. I have to put my glasses on to see them. But an audio ad, when it's in the mobile environment, doesn't have any of those disadvantages. And that's one of the reasons advertisers in the US have gone to Pandora primarily for their mobile needs. When you look at who are the advertisers that are using online audio and digital audio for their advertising mix, it's basically everybody. So this is a list of all of the folks that in the past 12 months have used online radio for part of their advertising marketing messages. This is the top auto brands, the top retailers, the top financial services companies, telecom, restaurants. These are blue chip names. So again, it's the take-up rate has been certainly very high. And one of the reasons they're taking it up is because online advertising on a radio station or on online radio has had a much significant increase in recall rates and in consumer response rates. So this is a study from the US where you see that you can actually get a 2 to 3 time boost to your response rates if you have an audio message that's concurrent with the banner. So the orange line is banner ad only responses, and the green line is when the ad has an audio associated with it. So one of some of the features of this advertising include the fact that it's an immersive ad experience. So the way it works is that you hear an audio ad, you see a banner, they tend to be synced together, but also that it's targetable. Now, for the radio world, targetability is brand new to us. Because we don't have that in broadcast radio. Obviously, we've had it for a long time on the digital side. But you're able to target audio ads, whether it's by station audience, by demographics, by geography, or even by the device that you're listening to. And that's something that doesn't exist in the radio world. There's a great story recently from about a year ago. There was a young man in America, and he wanted to propose marriage to his girlfriend. So he actually reached out to Pandora and said, I'd like to run an audio ad that is hyper-targeted, that only my girlfriend and I would hear, that nobody else would hear. So can you help us do this? So they worked with him, and they actually set up a user profile in Pandora for they changed his profile to be a 99-year-old woman living in Atlanta, Georgia, which is where he was living. And when he got into his car one night, he turned on his internet-connected Pandora device in his car, and he was driving, and they were listening to one particular station on Pandora. And after a couple of songs, in came a hyper-targeted ad, which only 99-year-old women in Atlanta at that given time listening to this particular station from their car would be able to hear, which was obviously just him. And so you hear a couple of songs and all of a sudden there was a voice that said, "Hey Maggie, Maggie, yes you, I'm talking to you. Maggie Smith, you're probably wondering why your boyfriend Kyle is smiling. Well, he wants to ask you to marry him." And so this was a great example of a hyper-targeted ad, which is something that the world of radio has never had, and gives you a sense for the direction things are headed in. Speaking of the connected car, another big trend in online audio throughout the world is the ability to connect your automobile to your phone and have a rich audio experience in the car. This is really the playground that the major players in the United States are fighting over right now. Pandora is integrated into more than 50 models of automobiles. Spotify, iHeartRadio have done the same. You can see that 20% of 18 to 24-year-olds in the past month have listened to Pandora from their car. This really, I think, is a big threat for broadcast radio. Broadcast radio has always viewed the car as the last bastion where they have full control over. And now the digital world is slowly creeping into that last bastion as well. So who are the publishers? Who are the folks that are getting involved in this online audio space? And I think one delineation to make, which is important, is the difference between music lockers, or how you collect and keep your music, and radio. This difference has always existed, and it hasn't changed with the advent of technology. The way you collect your music over time has changed. So, I used to have my collection on LP records, and I remember when I was a kid, the first LP I got was Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell and Billy Joel Glass Houses, and I was very excited. And then 8-tracks came along and cassettes came along, and I started changing my collection, throw out the albums, get the cassettes. And then CDs came sometime in the mid-'80s for me, at least. So I threw out all my cassettes and moved over to CD. Then new technology came out and it all became MP3. Now it's all in the cloud. With every advent of technology and how you collect your music, it's been a substituted process where the previous technology is thrown out and new technology comes and replaces it. But it's also an experience where when you have your music collection and you listen to your music collection, you tend to want to wall yourself off from the rest of the world. The listening experience is a very personal experience. And it's not one where you're being socially connected and you don't want to be interrupted when you're listening to your music collection. That's why you don't have ads in between every song on a CD. Otherwise, I'm sure record labels would try to do that. So that's how you collect your music. But radio is different from that. Radio has had technological change over the years. We had AM, and then we had FM, and then satellite radio, and now internet radio. But each of those technological changes has been an additive process, not a substitutive process. So the previous technology is still alive and thriving, but it hasn't completely replaced the earlier iteration. Moreover, when you listen to radio, that's when you want to connect to the world. That's when you want to find out what's happening, what's the latest gossip, what's the latest song by Justin Timberlake that's out. How can I, what's the news, what's the sport, what's the stock, what happened with the stock market? And that is an environment which is conducive to advertising. So you may also be interested to see what's the latest car that's out, or what's the great new offer from my local bank. And that's why radio has always been conducive to advertising, whereas in the world of music lockers and how you keep your music collection, it's never been necessarily as conducive. There's been a lot of talk recently that Apple is going to enter this space. There was rumors that they were supposed to enter actually in the first quarter of 2013. We haven't seen it yet, but we think that's actually a great thing. Whenever Apple enters into spaces like this, they tend to bring innovation and drive the market even higher. So we're actually looking forward to Apple's market entry, and I think it would be a very good thing for the online audio space as well. So we'll see what Apple does towards the end of this year. So with that in mind, we started looking at the Turkish market for online audio and digital advertising, and we sort of roughly said, look, we've got an addressable market which is a little bit under $500 million Turkish lira a year that we can address, and there's some existing players already doing streaming audio. You've got folks like Fizzy and Turkcell Music, you've got TTNet Music and others. So what are we going to do? How are we going to play in this space? And our goal was that we really wanted to be an independent brand. We didn't want to be a brand that was tied into another product at the heart. So we're not about selling cell phones, we're not about selling internet service or beer or anything else. We're here in and of itself about music, and that's why we built the Carnival.com brand to be an independent radio service that our group radio stations, but also new radio stations, could thrive in. So what is Carnival? Carnival is, first and foremost, we're about real radio. We are not an on-demand service. It's not a service that's about a music search engine. We're not really trying to be any of those things. We're about radio. And as radio, we're about station brands and identities. Some of those stations may be edgy, some of them may be conservative, but they all have a real brand and identity with them. And we don't really purport to have hundreds of thousands of radio stations. There are some aggregator applications out there that try to aggregate 70,000 radio stations from around the world in one place. We think that's great, but you tend to listen to 2 or 3 radio stations that you know, not 70,000. So we want to have enough radio stations to meet every taste that we think is necessary. So there probably would never be more than 20 stations in the mix of what we're doing. And all of those stations would have real humans involved. So you would have DJs and personalities. These would be people that can help amuse you and guide you and curate the music that you're listening to, so that it's not just an automated music stream. And lastly, we want to have all the things that make radio real, that make it local and palpable. So this is all the stuff that goes in between the music. It's the news, the weather, the sports, the gossip, anything that makes a radio station radio rather than a simple playlist. And we also have some elements of personalization and social as well, which are important in the mix. So for us, having as much access as possible is important. We really try to be everywhere that we can. We're on mobile, we're on tablet. Tomorrow we'll be at the TV Connect Fair in London to announce that we'll be launching a smart TV application on 12 manufacturers simultaneously. We're really trying to be as many places as possible and try to be as ubiquitous as possible. And the listening experience in Carnival is largely split into 2 areas. One is sometimes you want to lean back and get other people to program to you. And that's what we call the curated listening experience, curated listening experience, when somebody can program music better than I can. So I let the radio stations and the DJs of that station program to me. But sometimes you want to lean forward, be a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more active in your music selection. And for that, we have a service called Jelly, and I'll take you through Jelly in a bit. So in our platform today, we've got a number of different radio stations that are targeting as many different audiences as possible. Most of these are live right now. There's a couple that are going to be live in the next few months. And we're trying to target as many different musical tastes that we think is necessary within Turkey, but not too much. At the same time, we're working with some great content partners like Borusan Sanat in Borusan Classic, which is one of the first classic music radio stations in the country. We're working with Kerem Gürsev in Enjoy Jazz to bring real content to the world of jazz. And we'll continue to develop these stations as we move forward. When you listen to the radio stations on Carnival, what differentiates us from regular audio streaming services like TuneIn and such is that our experience is what we call a rich radio experience. When you listen to the radio, you can, we've got real DJs to help guide you. We've got rich artist content, so you can look at biographies and photographs and video galleries. We've got the freshest music news available. We've got some elements of personalization through time shifting, so you can pause the live radio, rewind, fast forward, and go back to live. We've got some news that you can listen to on demand, so the latest weather report, news reports, stock scores, etc. All of that you can get on an on-demand basis. We've got some great contests. We also have an integration with Ticketmaster, which is one of the first in the world, that when you're listening to an artist and that artist happens to have a concert in town, then you can click that and take it to, you can click and someone's listening to Carnival right now apparently. You can click and go to Ticketmaster to buy a ticket for that particular artist. We also have a service that we think is great and very exciting. We're very excited by it, and this is a service called Jelly. And Jelly is a social radio experience. We're the exclusive partner of Jelly in Turkey, and the experience is really 100% user-controlled radio. So you're able to control the music that you listen to. It's based on votes of the listeners. It controls both our digital and our FM broadcasts. And we're adding more than 30,000 registered users per month to this. If you haven't downloaded Jelly, I'd recommend it. It's a very fun application that's really bringing a new social element to radio. So Carnival's had a massive listener growth over the past year. Our daily unique users has gone up 5 times since we launched last year, and we're currently doing about 5 million unique listeners per month, and that continues to grow. So we're quite happy about this. And most importantly for us, we're building a presence on the international stage as well. And Carnival has now established itself as the 14th largest radio stream in the world as measured by Triton Digital. And we expect that to be in the top 10 hopefully before the end of this year. So with that, thank you.